Hi there, and thanks for listening. If you're enjoying our podcast and have a recommendation about someone you think we should have on to share their voice and journey with the world, by all means, let us know. It could be an aid worker, monastic, author, journalist, doctor, resistance leader, really anyone with some tie or another to the ongoing situation in Myanmar or anything related to its history or culture. To offer up a name, go to our website, insightmyanmar.org, and let us know. But for now, just sit back and take a listen to today's episode.
My guest today is Maw Shein Win, poet, teacher, artist, and organizer. She has written multiple books of poetry, including Score and Bone, Invisible Gifts, New and Selected Poems, and her most recent full-length entitled Storage Unit for the Spirit House. She has contributed poetry to multiple anthologies, including Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring, edited by Coco Thet and Brian Hammond, and has contributed to many artistic and musical endeavors in the Bay Area, which she calls home. Maw Shein Win, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Zach. It's wonderful to be here.
Fantastic. And so I was kind of hoping that we would start our conversation today by just having you read a little bit of your poetry so we can get a sense of the sort of spirit or style of your writing.
All right. Well, I think I will begin with reading the last poem in Storage Unit for the Spirit House, which was published by Omnidawn in 2020. And the title is Spirit House 6. The gnats had moved into the house on Inya Lake, zoomed through halls with pocket knives, tamarind seeds, green bananas. Family offerings of jade bracelets, cheroot cigars, deer tails. Medium danced wildly in the living room, drunk on palm wine, spinning, spinning. Orchestra of circle drums and copper bells played on the staircase. Natpwe. 8 children on the floorboards, leaping over uncles and cousins, shaking, shaking. Mother lit candles on the wall shrine. She spoke to the blue-winged insects. They whispered back. A gnat warmed itself by the flame. Auntie walked in a dream state. Hot room. Cousin slowly opened a large trunk of teak and silver strips. The gnats flew inside, one after the other, after the other.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that actually really nicely frames up a good amount of what I hope to be the rest of our conversation. So to begin with, I was hoping that I could learn a little bit more about your story, your journey to this present moment. So maybe if you could tell me a little bit about you, just sort of where you come from, how you got started with poetry, how you got here, that'd be wonderful.
Sure. Well, my parents both emigrated from Myanmar. My father first arrived in the early 60s, and my mother arrived a year later. They were both medical students. They met in medical school in Burma, and they did their residencies in the U.S. And I was born in Massachusetts, in a suburb of Boston, and I was the firstborn in the U.S. My two older sisters were born in Myanmar, and they stayed in Myanmar until, well, it's a long story, but until my parents could get settled. And
Sure.
but it took a while.
Right.
So, anyways, we moved a lot, and we moved from Massachusetts to New York City to Pennsylvania, where my younger sister was born, to Grand Junction, Colorado, where my brother was born, my youngest brother, and then to Nevada, at Southern California, and then I moved to the Bay Area.
Wow.
And I live in El Cerrito, which is in the East Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so my story about poetry. So it's such an interesting question to think about, because I know that my parents had an interest in poetry. My mother read Emily Dickinson when she was at university. And I think my father even had an interest in the arts, but they both ended up studying medicine and not the arts.
Right.
And so as I was growing up and, going to multiple schools, I started keeping a journal at an early age, and, just wrote little notes. And then I don't even know if I would call them poems, but I just started writing observations and thoughts. And in elementary school, I finally shared something I had written, which I guess was my first poem, with one of my teachers in 5th grade. And she said to me, you're going to be a poet. Well, you actually already are a poet. And no one had ever said that to me before. I certainly hadn't had that conversation with my parents. And anyways, so, I just continued to write. And I wrote in junior high and high school, and served as the editor, and wrote for the papers for the, schools. And I, just continued to write poetry, but also thought that maybe I might be a journalist. And when I started college, I started out as a journalism major. And I had one semester, and I just decided that poetry was what I wanted to follow. And so unfortunately, the school I was at did not have a poetry program. So I transferred, and that was it. I just poetry has been such a big part of my life. Obviously as a creative person, also as a teacher, and as a as a member of different artistic communities.
Right. Because you had done in the past, you've done music, you've collaborated with visual artists, that sort of thing. How did you kind of wind your way to kind of being what you might call a professional poet, or someone who writes for a living, I suppose? What sort of journey? What did that look like?
Oh, well, first, Zach, I want to say, I don't know if I'm a professional poet, because I'm not making a living from my poetry. Let's just say that. My main profession is teaching. So
we could say published poet. How's that?
Published poet. I think that works a little bit better.
All right.
You know what? That really is a good question, Zach, because I when as a young person, actually even in high school, I became interested in punk rock. And I started going to shows, and it was such a great time in Los Angeles in the early 80s.
Oh, yeah.
if you were into music and a certain type of music, like, punk, not only punk rock, but, art punk music and
Right.
experimental music. So that was, a very big part of my life. Going to shows, which I continue to this day, maybe not as
Nice.
much during the pandemic.
Right.
And so, you know, back then, I and, many of my friends, my two best friends who I'm still friends with today, Mark and Adrian, we, we had a band together. So we did music, but we all wrote. They were both visual artists. We all did performance art. And
Yeah.
I think there was like this openness to what we did. And it wasn't so much of like, I am a poet, we just
Right.
kind of, I don't know, just went ahead and worked within all the disciplines.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And but poetry is always, of course, just been something that has continued to be important in my life.
Yeah. 100%. And so like you said, that openness, that sort of ethos that comes maybe
Yeah.
from that sort of community that you were a part of at that time, like really being present in it, sort of seems like it converged into sort of focusing on the written word over a period of time. Is that accurate?
Yes. So, even as a performer, text and poetry, was always a component.
Right.
And, I just feel that, I've always been drawn to language and to, reading and to listening and, just like thinking of different ways, within my collaborations, with ways of how I can, use writing and text and work
Right.
together with, like musicians and,
Right.
videographers and
Right.
etc.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. And uh, what was the first thing that you wrote that got published? Do you remember what that was?
Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Okay, wow. Let me think about that. Um, well, you know what? Okay, so don't quote me on this, but
Sure.
there was a journal at my school, Cal State Long Beach, as
Yeah.
an undergraduate, and I think it was called Rip Rap. It was called Rip Rap.
Nice.
My first poem might have been in Rip Rap, um, but also back then I wrote for Flipside, which was a punk rock magazine that was
Okay.
published in Southern California, and there was a poetry section. And I might have had a poem in there, but no, you know
Yeah.
what? Actually, I think it was Rip Rap.
Nice. That's a fantastic way to get started. Uh, Excellent. And so then, so you've sort of progressed through your life. Did you kind of come back to poetry? Was I guess what did you do in the middle there, like between that point and then let's say publishing your most recent book?
Oh, well, that's a long span.
Yeah.
How do I sum up that? I'm teasing you. Well, I would say for these past decades, you know, I, I mean, poetry actually has just been ever present in my life. I mean,
Yeah.
I would say there was a period of time, maybe, I don't know. Well, that's not true. I was going to say, well, yes, it's true. There was a period of my life where I was solely focused on teaching,
Hmm.
and didn't write as much.
Right.
But I still wrote, but it wasn't, my primary passion. I was just,
Right.
obsessed with teaching, wanting to be the best teacher. I still want to
Yeah.
be an excellent instructor, but,
Yeah.
going to teaching conferences and doing curriculum development, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera. And, writing, maybe wasn't the first thing I do in the morning. So then, after a period of time, I realized that I missed, you know, having poetry be, a focus. And so I guess I returned, even though I didn't really leave poetry, I, returned to it in a more passionate way, a little later. And then I started, I actually didn't think that much about trying to get my work published.
Sure.
I did a lot of readings, and I still do. I love doing poetry readings, and I like organizing readings. And so, I started sending my work out, and I got published here and there, which was nice, and also got many, many rejections, as writers do.
Right.
And then I got interested in making zines.
Yeah.
So so in when I was going to a lot of the music shows, like in the 80s, I stapled together chapbook called not a chapbook, like a zine, I guess, of poetry, music, poetry by musicians and poets, photography, art. And it was just a little stapled together zine, and I'd sell it for 50 cents or $1.
Nice.
At shows. And
Enterprise.
It was called Lemon Fingers Emerge. That's the name of it.
Oh, cool. I like that. Very nice. Very nice. And so then what brought you into writing your first sort of full-length published book, I suppose? Is it chapbook? I don't know what
God, now I can't even remember how old I was, but I applied for a grant kind of on a fluke and got it. And so actually my first book that I don't really talk about very much because I was, just kind of young when I wrote it, actually was a full-length collection. A full-length collection is maybe over 50 pages.
Gotcha.
I think it was like 100 pages or something. And with the money from the grant, that book came out, and then it was called Tales of a Lonely Meat Eater.
Nice.
And then, I just really wasn't focused on organizing a manuscript or submitting manuscripts. And, then when I went through my divorce many, many years later with my ex, I wrote about that experience and that time. And I had, a group of poems that I was working on in collaboration with my friend Mark Dutcher, who I mentioned earlier is one of my best friends who lives in Southern California, and he's an artist. And I would send him work, and he would respond with an image of his paintings, and vice versa. And we did this kind of back and forth. And Ruins of a Glittering Palace was published by Spa Commonwealth. And so I think that was probably it was my first chapbook. And then years later, Score and Bone was published by Nomadic Press, which is a wonderful press in Oakland. And that chapbook was inspired by a period of time where I was recovering from surgery. I had a double hip replacement surgery.
Oh,
so much fun. Not.
So you had nothing to do except write poetry.
Yeah. So but now I would joke about it and call it my double hip residency, because I basically had 6 months where I was able to write. Friends would come over, friends who were writers, and would write together for hours. And then I also watched, a lot more films than I usually watch. And so hence the title Score and Bone. Yeah. And then Invisible Gifts, which was my first full-length collection, was published by Manic D in 2018. and then Storage Unit for the Spirit House in 2020.
Yes, exactly. I love those titles. Like each of those titles just evokes so much. And there's like a something that kind of comes over me when I hear those words.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it feels like there's something, again, there's something larger. There's something that I'm connecting to. It's like a conduit, like a gateway into that space. I'm
Oh,
always
I love that.
I'm always very interested in what things are titled or what the names are that we give to things, because it kind of, again, it can be a gateway into that space again.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me into my next question. So your most recent full-length book is entitled Storage Unit for the Spirit House. Can you tell me a little bit about that title, like why you chose it, what it means to you, how it came about?
Well, it's funny when you talk about titles, Zach, because I have to say titles are really challenging for me.
Yeah.
And when I was working on this collection, I probably had 15 different titles.
Sure.
And it was really hard. It was really a process coming to this title. And by the way, I'm glad it ended up with this title, especially thinking about some of the early titles that I thought of using.
Yeah, right.
And, my husband, Tom, he just said, no, that doesn't work.
Right.
It's great getting feedback from him.
Yeah.
So the collection, I, started, well, it really started when I was thinking about storage units, surprise, surprise. And I was, Tom Skandura, my husband, who's a drummer, he's a musician. He and I were going through a period of transition where we moved from the house I was living in Berkeley. Anyways, we had to sell the house. I had to sell the house. And we spent a year where we were moving around and just got rid of, almost, I don't know, I would say like 75% of my belongings. Just gave everything away. Furniture, and then just whatever we had left, which were things like my huge record collection, probably 45 boxes of books, musical instruments, the important stuff.
That's right.
Ephemera, photos, and art. We collect art. Was in 2 storage units. So during that period, I just spending so much time at our storage units, I just started thinking about storage units and kind of the symbolism of what storage units can represent, and in not just the symbolism, but the practical nature of storage units, and thinking about like, why do people, hold on to certain objects that might seem completely random to somebody else, but there's some reason that these objects, whatever they are, hold some kind of importance, whether emotional or just I don't know. I just found that so interesting. And I started writing poems around the idea of containers and containment. And so I wrote a series of, poems based on different forms of architecture, like huts and malls and factories. And I mean, even thinking of certain, natural, phenomena, as containers as well. And then what led me to the Spirit House was I had my collection. I was, working, sharing my work in progress with my wonderful publisher, Rusty Morrison of Abidjan, and she's also an editor, a marvelous editor. And I told her that I felt like there was something missing. And I started thinking about the spirit houses that I had seen while visiting my family in Myanmar, and also traveling in Thailand and just various travels. And I started writing the Spirit House poems.
Interesting. Can you tell me real quick what a spirit house is?
Yeah, so a Spirit House is, well, it's a little structure on, 4 posts. And in the Spirit House, you will have offerings to the Nat spirits, NAT.
Okay.
And there's a whole, like, if you just Google, Nat spirits,
Mm, mm, mm.
even on Wikipedia, there's just so much information. And
Right.
and I just became fascinated, not knowing that much
Right.
about the belief system. And I was just absolutely fascinated. So, there are these spirits that can maybe wreak havoc in your life, in one's
Okay.
life.
Yeah.
And you want to appease the spirits. So you might make offerings. I mean, and also in the way you would make offerings to, to Buddha or the gods,
Right. Right. Right.
goddesses, flowers and incense and,
Sure.
water. And I just really, kind of threw myself into researching the spirit houses and
Yeah.
started writing these poems.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting just to think about that connection of like storage units, containers, sort of what that means for something to be contained, and what the different shapes and different structures kind of entail or evoke or mm, whatever emerges from that, and then combining that with the idea of spirits or the idea of like a home for spirits. Um, I think that's very interesting. How so? What emerged out of that? What emerged from combining those two ideas?
So, it was actually after I wrote the Spirit House poems, which were the last poems that I'd written for the book,
Sure.
except for one of them, but the poems that I'd written for the book. Then things started to fall into place as
Mm,
far as organizing a manuscript, which is
mm,
not an easy thing, I might add.
sure.
And so it ended up being 6 sections, and I had a Spirit House poem, like open each, section of the book, right?
Sure. Sure.
So my friend Mark did drawings, illustrations for each section.
Uh,
So and then so there's a drawing and then one of my Spirit House poems that
yeah.
either open, like you would open a storage unit, right,
Right.
or
Right.
close
Mm,
each section. And I was, I just feel so happy about the cover because Adrian de la Pena, my other dear friend,
yeah.
I didn't know what to have for the cover, but of course it just, um, naturally I thought of a spirit house, but I didn't really want to have a photo per
Right.
se.
Right.
And so Adrian did a wonderful art piece, which is on the cover. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I have storage unit poems as well as spirit house poems, along with other pieces, of course.
Right. 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 Yeah, so what would you say are the other themes that run through your poetry in this book in particular, and maybe at large? If you look at your kind of like your body, especially more recently, what are some of those themes that you find?
Well, I would say some of the themes, definitely family,
Yeah,
uh, the spirit world,
yeah,
um, thinking, about, well, oh, let me back up a little bit.
sure,
For storage unit for the spirit house, as I said, containment and thinking about the different types of containment and breaking free from
yeah,
containment as well, you
yeah,
know. So, and of course, poetry itself, poems are containers, right?
yes, yes,
And so I just feel like with this collection, after the inspiration of writing the Spirit House poems and, then looking at my work and I realized, oh, I really use not only objects but structures
Mm,
as a theme,
mm,
and like boxes and rooms and eggs and bars and cellars. And so I guess, thinking about it, in retrospect, even though I wasn't consciously like, I'm going to write a poem that is around the idea of a container.
sure.
Um, I think that just naturally arose with this book,
Right.
as well as other pieces too.
Right.
Um, But what I'm working on right now, I'm working on a new manuscript. And um, another theme, since you're asking about themes
Yeah.
and subject matter, I write a lot about the body. So for
Mm,
example, Score and Bone was about, the body and illness and recovery.
mm,
And, in my new manuscript, there are also poems about the body and its challenges and struggles, and
mm.
hopefully about healing.
Yeah.
and, and then I think just the fact that I love to collaborate,
Mm,
art makes its way into my work. Invisible Gifts on Natick D Press.
mm,
I I mean, I don't name the sections like film, visual art, or anything like that. But when I was putting that book together, one of the organizing structures, I was one of my wonderful friends in a writing group I have, Lori, um, said to me, she said, "Ma, I just noticed that you use colors a lot,"
mm.
which, I mean, of course, I knew that, but it was to hear her point that out,
Yeah.
it helped me so much in organizing that collection.
Yeah.
So, one section, let's see, I have it right here, is called, hang on, Bluebells. Another section is called Pink Light.
Mm,
A third section is Silvery Moth. And then the
mm,
final section is called The Greenhouse.
mm.
And so, organizing that book was, just kind of based on the color theme. And not that every poem had to have color in it, but,
Right. Right.
it helped with thinking that collection through. And
Right.
so now what I'm thinking about a lot are I'm a list maker.
Sure. Sure.
In
Okay.
fact, this interview today is at the top of my list because I make a list every single morning.
Yeah.
And so I've been writing these various lists and, well, logs,
Yeah.
log poems since the pandemic
Sure.
started, maybe even before the pandemic. But that has been a theme, and just thinking about, you know, what happens within a period of time in the
Mm,
world,
mm,
um, in a house, in
mm.
a room, in
Yeah.
your head, in your
Right.
body,
Right.
in a day, in a minute.
Right.
And so that I would say is one of the primary um, themes or structures that I've been
Yeah.
interested in.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the things I notice is each one of the things you named is a container.
Right,
It
right.
is a container of type or of
Yeah.
sorts, and within that container, the contents change.
Yes.
The contents move out. Some things stick around. Some things are there just very in a fleeting way. Uh,
Right.
very much like our experience, very much
Yeah.
like how we understand and move through the world.
Right. Good
And
point.
that's such a beautiful thing to think about. If you can, again, speaking of poetry as a container as well, poetry can kind of contain the spirit of this. Poetry can kind of evoke the spirit of that in another person. It's sort of a way of connecting your experiences, perhaps, to words, which then can connect to the experiences of other people.
Right.
And that really, again, opens up and creates community, even though the author might not be there, or the reader might not be there while the author's writing.
Mhm.
That spirit is combined through that medium.
I really love that.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, Zach. Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. And so that kind of leads a little bit into your sort of process.
Uh-huh.
So I hear you saying that you had journals. There was like lists and things like that. I also heard you talking about like after you've written the poem, I would imagine there's maybe an editing process or
Mhm.
something that goes on, and then there's a sort of let's put it all together, make kind of a larger piece out of this.
Mhm.
What is your process? Like, do you have a set process? Does it change over time? What's that kind of look like for you?
So, well, firstly, I want to say a big part of my writing process is I love writing together with
Ah,
other people.
yeah,
I'm in 3 writing groups,
sure,
and, um, well, I mean, ever since the pandemic started, we've
yeah,
been meeting on Zoom.
sure.
Except one writing group I'm in now, it's a Bay Area group. We meet in person outdoors, and that's kind of love. That's only been in the last couple months, and that's actually been quite lovely to
Yeah,
see people and be together. And and I have writing partners. So I just wanted to bring that up, that I'm very much interested in writing together, and I like to teach workshops on writing together as well.
yeah,
And but of course, as writers too, we are doing it solo
right,
sometimes,
right.
oftentimes, right? And so I keep a variety of notebooks,
Mm,
many, many notebooks, piles and piles and piles of notebooks.
mm,
And I I love just the language that can come up anywhere. You
yeah,
know, like I might be listening to a radio show, Hidden Brain, or like a podcast like Hidden
mhm,
Brain, and it just like will lead me down just this path of looking up something, researching something that I heard about on that show,
yeah,
and um, and so I guess a part of my writing process is that I keep multiple notebooks,
mm.
and then
Can I
what?
interrupt real quick?
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Are they organized in any way? Is it
I wish. I always try. Like I have 3 or 4 different notebooks, and my goal is always like, okay, Ma, this is the notebook that's just your random thoughts.
sure,
This is the notebook that maybe are your thought logs.
sure,
This isn't it. But then what happens is they just kind of start all interweaving. And so
sure.
which I can say can kind of make it a little bit of a challenge when I, sit down and like, okay, I'm going to write a poem, work on a poem now. And wait a minute, which notebook is it in?
Yeah, right,
Oh,
exactly.
God.
I can
So
identify.
yeah, I wish I were a little more organized, actually.
Yeah,
I
it's all
I
good.
talk about it in theory. That's my goal, but,
Right, right.
yeah, and so, I I don't write at the same time every day,
Mm,
although I have 2 friends where we meet on Zoom early for me,
mm,
in the morning, and we only talk for about 5 minutes.
mhm,
Um, and then we write for maybe 40 minutes and then share a little bit or not at the end. And
mm.
I've found that that has been really enriching for my writing process, just as far as like, again, writing together.
Yeah.
And then a lot of my revision will come from, of course, doing multiple drafts,
Mm.
reading it aloud, but
Mm.
also doing readings. So when I've prepared for poetry readings, I'll read it out loud because I want to time myself to make sure I stay within the
Right,
time
right.
frame. And I have edited many a poem uh, based on reading the poem out loud for a reading and realizing, wow, that is, I got to change that word, or I've got to take out that word.
Sure.
So I would say, readings are also a part of my process.
Well, and if you don't mind me saying so, that
Uh,
that speaks to the collaboration aspect. You're in relationship with your audience.
Yes.
while you're doing that, and so you're sort of it's like a gift in a sense. And so you're sort of being considerate of the audience, being considerate of the context that you find yourself in, and then choosing to use that as like an editing tool. I mean, that's such an interesting, because I've noticed that again in kind of preparing for this interview, watching a bunch of other interviews and speaking gigs that you've done. It was really lovely to hear how you read your poetry. It really did flow. It really did feel like I felt the emotion. I felt it at the same time. I felt like I was connected to it, and so it's really great that that's actually something that is a part of your process. That it kind of comes out in the end, if you will.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've had this talk with other writers and, who perform, who do readings.
Hmm.
And they're like, yeah, isn't it interesting? Like because you can read it on the page or you can read it on the screen,
Yeah.
but when you read it out loud and also consider the audience, think about the audience hearing it, as well, there is a different part of my editing brain that
Hmm.
comes out.
Hmm.
And I think it has to do with the audio, the audio, the sound of the words and
Right.
just, yeah, the sonic qualities.
That's super interesting. That's very interesting. Okay, excellent. Sorry, I got a little sidetracked in that, but that's lovely. And so you sort of practice. You'll say it out loud as a part of your editing process. You'll read it to others as a part of that process as well. How do you put the poems together? How do you decide what gets in, what doesn't get in? What's that process like?
Well, that is always, well, I shouldn't say always. That can really be a challenge because sometimes what happens, and I'll only speak for myself, but I know I'm not the only poet who would admit this.
Right.
Sometimes you have, these poems that for whatever reason, it's like, oh, I like this poem. But then you realize as you're, forming the manuscript and organizing it, that certain poems should not be in the collection. They
Yeah.
just don't fit. I mean, it's like curating a show, right? Or
Right. Right.
directing a film, like any kind of, art that we do, you can't include everything in the kitchen sink.
Right. Right.
So, I'm not going to say which book, but there is one book. Not that I have that many, but there's one poem, maybe even two, not storage unit for the spirit house, by the way,
Sure. Sure.
where I'm just like, oh, maybe that poem didn't fit,
Sure.
and yeah, so, but it's hard when you're in the space of actually doing it. But
Yeah.
I think it's, obviously I love getting feedback from writer friends, different poets, different groups that I'm in. And, poet friends have been extraordinarily helpful in just saying, you know what, Ma, I like that poem, but it doesn't fit in this collection. I'm like, great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, exactly. Do you find that you have you develop attachment to certain poems, certain they kind of like they're your kids or something like that?
Yes, that's what I mean. It's just like, oh, wait, but I still love this one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, it's good to let the kids leave the house.
There you
Like
go.
let them go, let them
That's
go.
right. That's right. That's right. That's excellent. And I would imagine you do that in collaboration sometimes with so other writers, that sort of thing, but also perhaps editors and things like that. I know
Oh,
nothing about this world, so this is brand new to me.
yeah, I mean, and that is a collaboration, working with editors, because the editor might have an idea. Well, Ma, I don't know if that works, and and it's a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe I feel really, any writer, poet, feels really strongly, like, I really want to have this in there. This is why. Or, you know what? You're right. It isn't fitting. you know? So, and I actually appreciate that relationship. I like
Yeah.
having those conversations.
Yeah.
And
Excellent.
I like also having that conversation with students as well. And
Well,
and, you know, poets working on their manuscripts.
right. 100%. It gives you, I would imagine, might give you some insight into your own process as you kind of observe what they're doing, what they're thinking
Yes,
about. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. That's lovely. That's excellent. So, speaking of this type of thing, I have one maybe you might not want to answer, but maybe you will. Who are your favorite poets and why?
Oh, you know, that is a hard question to answer because I have so many poets. Just last night,
Hmm.
I was, you know, talking to my class,
Hmm.
and I wanted to talk about poets who really inspired me when I first got into poetry. And I remember that, you know, in my English classes, you know, would read certain poets, and I mean, of course, like always wanting to learn about, you know, different poets, historical poets.
Hmm.
But the first poet who really grabbed me, you know, in high school was E. Cummings.
Hmm.
And I think, well, I know it was because I thought that I had never read poetry like that before. And I really, you know, as someone who appreciates experiments and experimental, you know, art, music, literature, etc. I think that young, you know, poet, well, I'm not an experimental poet, but you know, that young poet
Right.
self was just like, oh, wow, this is amazing. So, anyways, very, very, very early influence. But
Yeah.
you know, I mean, just off the top of my head, I love Victoria Chang's work. Her latest book is The Trees Witness Everything, which is just marvelous. You know, Forrest Gander is an influence for sure. Twice Alive is marvelous book. I love C.A. Conrad. Their poems are within shapes, which I just find so intriguing. And oh my goodness, so many. I love Kabe Akbar. Pilgrim Bell is a book that I was just recently talking about in class. I love Tracy K. Smith, her books, and let's see. You know, right now I'm reading All the Flowers Kneeling by Paul Tran. And Amy Gersler is a poet that I've admired for a while. She has a book called Index of Women, which is wonderful. I read a lot. Well, if you can tell, I read a lot of poetry.
Yeah, absolutely.
and I also want to say, do a shout out for Coco Thet, who you mentioned. His latest book, Bamboo Phobia, is really wonderful. So if listeners have not checked that out, I would definitely say it's a great book to get. And yeah, I love M.K. Chavez, and yeah, just I mean, you know, I feel that as you know, readers, I mean, we're just so fortunate to have, you know, so many poetry books, readers of poetry, so many books, so many poets that are just, you know, I mean, my list is very long, actually. I could just be talking to you for hours. So I don't think you want me to keep going on and on.
Sure. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. So sort of a question that emerges out of that is, so you've read a lot of poetry. You're obviously sort of, you teach poetry. You're kind of steeped in that. What would you say makes a good poem? What are you looking for?
Well, that is okay, wait. So when you say a good poem, that the adjective good is completely subjective, right? So, you know, it really depends on what kind of poetry you like. But if I had to think of like just this general way of answering that question, because taste taste is subjective, right? I might
Right.
love something that you might just, oh, wow, Ma, that didn't really rock my world.
Right. Right.
Um, but, I mean, again, just being someone who appreciates the musicality of language,
Mm,
I love poets who use, sound and sonics, and where, we can tell that this is something that has just been considered. And,
mm,
you know, I mean, imagery that is, fresh, um, and um, and I like poets too who are kind of risky,
mm.
uh,
Yeah.
and I like poetry that surprises me,
Yeah.
where I just, oh, I did not expect that,
Right.
but it that turn, but it just absolutely works for me, and so that sense of like, I mean, not in every single poem, obviously, but,
Mm,
sometimes that sense of play, with language,
yeah.
and imagery. And, poems that move. I mean, there are just so many, of course, different schools of poetry, different types of poetry. Um, I don't read within one school. I have an appreciation for all types of poetry,
Right.
and yeah, I mean it just feel like it's very rich as far as being able to just find poets who you want to read over and over again, and
Right.
maybe that is something I would say that might fall under a, a quote unquote good poem in
Yeah.
my, just for me.
Right.
I will revisit that poem
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. There's something in it that draws you back.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Excellent. But and it also sounds like there are sort of what you might think of as many ladders or many doors.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of that comes from multiple different angles. So you can read one type of poetry for one type of experience or feeling, another type of poetry for another type of experience. You might be surprised. It
Right.
just kind of contains so many, again, doors and ladders to places that. Um, are difficult, I think, maybe to get to in maybe prose or just looking at a picture or whatever it might
Hmm.
be, sort of offers its own avenue to those other places.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I also feel that, reading, although I don't, these days, I'm not reading, as much prose,
Hmm.
but I find that, reading prose is also inspiring for my
Yeah.
poetry, obviously. I
Yeah.
mean, really, it's just, I feel like, not to sound cheesy, but
Hmm.
I mean, there is inspiration everywhere.
Right. Right. Exactly right. Exactly right. Um, yeah, that's lovely. And so, what kind of with this in mind, what advice might you have for like a young writer, someone who is, kind of experiencing the world and finding that putting their words down on paper is what helps them to maybe transform their experience or kind of capture their experience? What advice or what sort of hopes or what might you say to that person?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is to find your communities. And I want to
Mhm.
say communities because there are different communities, right? There's
Yeah,
not just one. And, I just as a young person, finding, my tribe,
yeah,
of artists and poets and dancers. And we all actually live together.
yeah,
And but and getting involved and not being afraid, so if you want to do a poetry reading or make a zine or self-publish, just leap into it.
mm,
And I mean, easier said than done, right? But
right,
but and do it together with someone else, if
yeah,
that makes it, I mean, that of course could be more fun, right? To
yeah,
create together. Um, And, you know, well, okay, so twofold. You know,
Mm,
one is if you are fortunate to find, you know, mentors in your life, you are very, very lucky, you know.
mm,
So, you know, people you really trust with your work. I mean, that is just like gold.
yeah.
And, you know, so having a mentor, I think, or mentors, is just so meaningful and important.
Mm,
In addition to finding your, you know, your peers and your poet
mm,
friends and your communities,
mm,
and then, you know, also thinking about, I mean, I guess this goes with like, well, collaborations, right?
mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
just thinking about, wow, what would it be like to work with a musician? Like my friend plays guitar.
Mhm.
Maybe we could create something together, you know?
Right. Right.
Um, so maybe just, you know, experiment, put yourself out there, um, you know, get involved, you know, with other writers and artists, and yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Fantastic advice. I, I,
Thanks.
I would I would say so from my perspective anyway. Um, and so it sounds like community has been an important thing for your journey, um, and finding your own community, finding your own identity in your own place. Um, what did your community end up looking like? So artists and that sort of thing, but was there any connection to sort of your Burmese identity or your identity as the child of immigrants? Anything like that that kind of stood out to you where you found community?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because I so you know, as you know, I live in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
and when I moved to the Bay Area, you know, I met, you know, different writers, and um, but I had a friend or two friends who said they're twins. They said we have a friend who's a Burmese poet,
Ooh,
and I said, what? Oh my gosh, this is many years ago, like in the 90s
right.
and early 90s or mid 90s. And his name's Kenneth Wong.
Mhm.
And I think Kenneth Wong has been on your podcast.
Sure, sure, yeah.
And Kenneth and I met and just immediately, well, of course, we bonded just because, you know, both being Burmese. He was born
Right.
in Burma. And and then over the years, we've, you know, organized and participated in various events,
Mm,
um, you know, centering around writers and authors who have, you know, Burmese ethnicity.
right.
And, you know, so recently we did well, actually, Audrey T. Williams, she and I hosted an event through Kundiman, NorCal, which was
Mm,
that Medicine for Nightmares, a
mm,
bookstore in San Francisco, and it was, you know, both on Zoom as well as in person, which is kind
mm.
of exciting because, you know, haven't done a lot of things in person as far as events, and so Kenneth was part of this, Audrey, of course, Michelle Dunn Marsh, Theory Myo Cha Miet. Uh, and that was just a lovely event. And it was, we all shared stories around, you know, and poetry around being Burmese. And it
Mhm.
was just very, very wonderful. And then I've done some events with Kenneth and Cocotet,
Mm.
you know, around the anthology, Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring, which
Yeah.
is just really an excellent. Have you read it?
I see. I haven't. It's. I
Oh,
actually just ordered it today,
oh, good, great,
so
great.
it's on the way.
Uh-huh.
Would you mind talking a little bit more about that anthology?
Yeah, well, I mean, well, one of these days, if you haven't interviewed Kenneth, I mean, I'm sorry, Cocotet, he would be a great person to interview. He lives in England.
Yeah.
So he and Brian Haman um,
Yep.
put together this anthology, and it's on Ethos Books. and they're witness poems and essays from Burma, Myanmar, 1988 to 2021. And it's organized in different sections, by time. The first section, actually it's by year. The first section is 2021. The second section is 2020 to 2010, et cetera, et cetera. And it really is just, I hope more people will check out this anthology, and the funds go towards helping out causes in Burma. And, one of the things we try to do in these various events that we've had is, just let people know about the situation of what's going on, in Myanmar, because, and especially, with, the coup and everything that's been happening, all the tragedy and suffering and just, all of it. It's not in the news as much as it used to be. Of course, there's so many other things that are going on in the world.
Always.
So, always, right? And I think it's really important to, try to, keep, the situation and what's going on in Myanmar in the public eye, even if it's, just having, a poetry reading. I mean, I don't want to say even, because poetry is so important,
it's important, yeah.
It really is. I mean, there, in the Bay Area, there's the Free Burma Action Committee. They do events, actually at City Hall in San Francisco. There are places to donate, like Mutual Aid Myanmar, Save Myanmar, Bay Area-based Burmese activists. And, if, I'm sure your listeners probably know about Irrawaddy and, Myanmar Now, but, there are places to go to get information. I'm really grateful to Dr. Penny Edwards at UC Berkeley. She's a professor in the Southeast Asian Studies Department. She has had a number of events around Myanmar and writers there and here. And so, there's, definitely, things going on to address, the situation. If you look.
Right, exactly. And that, I feel as though each person has a role, each person plays a part. It may not be direct on the ground or whatever it might be. It might be donations. It might be just goodwill. What role do you think poetry plays in this sort of?
Well, I think poetry actually plays an important role. Well, firstly, when you get the anthology, you'll see, poetry has such a long, rich background and tradition in Burma. And I can't name names, but, there are many poets, who are, pro-democracy movement who have been jailed and killed by the military. And, I feel that poetry is, has been, like a tool, seems kind of like a weird word, but I'm trying to kind of can't think of the right word, but just a way, to communicate, just let people know what's going on, and just be a way of connecting people.
Right. So as we kind of mentioned
to the
earlier,
experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, it's like both a container for a part of that person's sort of spirit, if you will, and then also a door. So it opens you to that experience, which can be brutal, which can be in the little bit of learning that I've done. It's not a pleasant experience, and people are making sacrifices and doing things that are very, very difficult. And to have a book of witness poems, I think, is a
Right.
brilliant idea, a brilliant way to sort of feed the spirit, open the doorways from the inside to the outside and the outside to the inside, and kind of reify that interconnected nature of our just existence. Things that happen in Bay Area, things that happen in New York or London or Taiwan or whatever it is, all of those things do come back and connect with the things that are happening in Myanmar, and the things that are happening in Myanmar connect outwards with the world at the same time. Um,
Right.
and
Right.
I think that poetry does a phenomenal job. It's like poets should be saints. There's
Well, no, I don't. I'm
it's just, but
joking.
it really
Yeah.
is brilliant because you're putting yourself out there in a way, like you said earlier. Well, if you want to do this, then you should just step out into it. Just
Uh-huh.
take a shot,
Right.
try it out.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult for people to do, and sort of make themselves vulnerable in that way, especially with something
Right.
like poetry, which seems like very personal and very soulful, if you will.
Right.
And so it's such a brave act,
Yes.
to put the pen to paper, to share what you've created, share your creation with the rest of humanity, and see what happens, and kind of open yourself to what comes after that.
Right.
And
Right.
it's a transformation, and it's a journey that we're all going on collectively. And so it's beautiful that poetry is a part of that journey, and a part of that struggle that again, we're all connected to.
Oh, that was really well spoken. Thank you, Zach.
Thank
Lovely.
you. Thank you. Sometimes it emerges. Sometimes it's gobbledygook. I don't know, but yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Is there? So you have a book that you're working on now.
Uh-huh.
A set of poems that you're working on now. Are there other things that are going on in your life that you want to let people know about?
Hmm. Well, let me think. I am, well, I'm always, just organizing one thing or
Mm-hmm.
another, and which I really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And I, will just, continue working on various projects, and and of course with my Burmese friends,
Mm,
we'll probably have future events. I
yeah.
no doubt, and and I really feel like having these events, whether on remotely or in person or both, is just a wonderful way of getting the word out there about
Mm,
different topics and subjects, and
right.
things that are going on. And I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing, and
Good.
yeah. Uh,
Good. Where can people find you? Do you want people to find you? Do you have
oh, well, I do happen to have a website.
perfect?
So it's Maw, M-A-W,
Mm,
Shein, Shein, Win, WIN.com. Okay, let's see. How about, you know what? Maybe I will read the poem. This is in storage unit, but it's also in the anthology.
perfect.
It's called Factory. Blindfold wound around a bleeding head. Sepia time cards and combination locks. Sound of coworkers arguing in the bathroom or the other way around. Crows captured in dim light. Murder mystery for a limited audience. Pupils of soft brazen green. Lacquerware box in an abandoned mall. Factory workers assembling cell phones and wheelchairs. A scorpion in the break room.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Spirit House 6. The Nats had moved into the house on Inya Lake. Zoomed through halls with pocket knives, tamarind seeds, green bananas. family offerings of jade bracelets, cheroot cigars, deer tails. Medium danced wildly in the living room, drunk on palm wine, spinning, spinning. Orchestra of circle drums and copper bells played on the staircase. Natpoi. 8 children on the floorboards, leaping over uncles and cousins, shaking, shaking. Mother lit candles on the wall shrine. She spoke to the blue-winged insects. They whispered back. A gnat warmed itself by the flame. Auntie walked in a dream state, hot room. Cousin slowly opened a large trunk of teak and silver strips. The gnats flew inside, one after the other, after the other.
I'm just like thinking about that, like the gnats flying into the chest, like that,
Uh-huh.
that feels, because gnats are, my understanding is that they're sort of a part of this, like you said, they can bring calamity
Uh-huh.
if you don't make offerings and that sort of thing, which makes a ton of sense. That's
Uh-huh.
kind of how life works.
Yeah.
If you don't worship the right things, then calamity kind of comes into your life.
Uh-huh.
And so the fact that at the end of it, they all come back in and they kind of, to me, it feels like there's like some closure there. They go to like a safe space and you're in a safe space after that. But you had to go through that entire journey in order to get to that point.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, when I was writing it, of course, I wasn't thinking, and this is going to be the last poem. But then I realized, oh, this is the perfect last poem,
Yes.
to close the book, because they're going, into the teak trunk. So I'd like to share a poem, which is the last poem in Invisible Gifts. And this book is dedicated to my sister, my second oldest sister, Terepo, who passed away. And I wrote this poem for her. And it's called Oars, Elegy for Sister. Glass rowboat, shadow falls across bright eye, finger glides down, river, shaded by haze, slim arms, bright fingers, trail waters long, gone, shades drawn, up, light bright against the eye, arm trails round along river below, the water bright up close. That's the last poem in Invisible Gifts.
Very nice.
So, Storage Unit for the Spirit House is dedicated to my mother, Aya Gunasari, and she is a bhikkhuni, and she started a monastery in Southern California in the desert. And I just want to say that my mother is an inspiration for me, and I've written about my mother. There are poems about her. So a bhikkhuni is a fully ordained female monastic in Buddhism. My mother, after leaving medicine, decided that she wanted to, of course, we were raised Buddhist, and she, my mom's Buddhist, but she, left her work and, just decided that she, was going to go into the training for becoming a bhikkhuni. And so she was ordained in Los Angeles as well as in Sri Lanka.
Right. And so she was a doctor. And then after, in kind of like her second life, if you will, she was a bhikkhuni. I would imagine you were grown at this point.
Yes.
Okay. How was that transition for you? Like, did it change the dynamics between yourself and your mom, or like what sort of emerged there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I mean, of course, my mom, her birth name was not Ayagunasari,
Mm,
right? That's her
mm,
spiritual name.
mm,
And, you as a Buddhist, when you make that decision to, lead a monastic life,
mm,
you also, you know, transition from being, it's called a householder,
mm,
which, you've had children and maybe you've been married and you've had a job,
mm,
and now you're, putting that behind you, right?
mm,
And
mm.
living a life, as a monastic.
Right.
So your life, as you can imagine, changes a lot.
Yeah.
And I, just when my mother made this decision to, become a bhikkhuni, and my siblings were very supportive
Mm.
of her.
It was honestly a point of curiosity for me, because I know you had
Uh-huh,
mentioned it earlier,
uh-huh.
and I honestly just thinking about it from your perspective, like if you're in that position, how that the nature of that relationship changes,
Yeah, yeah,
and so now you're no longer relating to her as mom, or maybe you still
right.
are, but it's a different. The nature of that relationship is different, and so everyone goes through that, right? So you get to
Yeah,
this point, and your parent becomes something different to you than they were
right,
before. That's
right.
fine, but this is
Yeah,
a different type of transition,
right.
and so that sort of I just wondered about that, how that impacted you, what you sort of
Yeah.
saw there, all that kind of good stuff. And then, did it change your views on Buddhism, perhaps, or did it change your views on, anything? Like, just thinking about how that might uh, adjust. Again, we're all interconnected, so it's like how that
Right.
change there might change something inside of you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I learned so many things we all did,
Hmm,
from my mother, making, this huge step into
mhm,
her new life, and
mhm,
I guess the reason I all of a sudden started thinking about that it might not be a good idea to include it, because when you asked me, how we all responded,
mhm,
I actually thought it was great. Like
mhm.
I was like, Mom, just do this. Obviously, I mean, she had talked about it before, and we weren't really
Yeah,
sure she really wanted to do, or meant it. And when she
right.
decided to do it, it's like, oh, okay, that's great.
We're glad to have had you with us for this episode of Insight Myanmar podcast. You might know that beyond sharing stories and conversations on this platform, we also carry out humanitarian projects through our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. As we all know, the challenges these days are vast, but so too are the opportunities to provide meaningful support. Your contributions go towards supporting critical initiatives, such as providing food, medical supplies, and basic necessities to internally displaced persons in conflict zones. You can help to fund healthcare services that save lives and bring dignity to those in need. Your generosity also supports education efforts for children, helps mobile medical clinics, and provides care packages to political prisoners. Just to name a few of the many programs we sponsor. You can support these impactful efforts and directly contribute to our projects, which uplift and empower those most affected by this crisis in Myanmar. Visit betterburma.org/donation to join us in this mission.
Oba yarananda dayananga yaranaya dayanam boda yaranam